today we're going to learn how to use Shopify and OpenAI's REST APIs to automatically generate category descriptions for a Shopify store. Let's suppose that you have a Shopify store with 100 collections, and none of those collections have a description. You want to add descriptions because you want to offer value to search engines to be able to identify more easily what the content of that collection is. Frequently, search engine experts recommend adding a description to your categories that's between 250 to 300 characters. That offers more value not only to your users so they can understand what the content of that category is, but it also helps search engines identify more easily what the content of that category is. However, to update 100 collections or more, you would have to spend time writing the descriptions for each of those collections. That means time devoted by your team or potentially hiring a copywriter to generate the copy for each of those collections. We can automate this using AI by piping information into OpenAI's API, basically allowing ChatGPT to do the work of writing the category descriptions for us. And then all we need to do is validate that those category descriptions match our expectations. To do this, we'll need API keys for OpenAI and Shopify, and we'll need to write a script that leverages the REST APIs of both platforms. To generate an API key in Shopify, go to Settings, and then Apps and Sales Channels. Because you want to generate an API key for your own development, you will want to click Develop Apps. Here, I already have a custom app for Joey's scripting, but for instructional purposes, I will demonstrate how to create the API keys. Click Create an App, and then name your app. We can say Shopify Scripting. Once you've named your app, you'll want to specify an app developer, and then you want to create your app. Once you've created your app, you'll want to configure your admin API scopes and your storefront API scopes. In this case, we don't need any storefront API scopes. We only need category API scopes on the back end. To get access to category API scopes within the admin, you want to search for product listing. If you search for collections, product listings will also show up. You will want both read and write access. Read access will allow us to pull down a list of collections, and write access will allow us to push information back to Shopify once the category descriptions have been generated by OpenAI. So save your API integration scopes, and then click API credentials. You'll need to generate an access token by installing the app. Install the app, and then reveal the admin API access token. Note that this token will only be shown once, so you'll need to copy it and save it somewhere for later use. Because I already have an app generated and I'm using the tokens for that app, I will not need the Shopify scripting app, and for security purposes, I will go ahead and deactivate it by uninstalling the app and then deleting the app within app settings. So I will be using Joey's scripting app. To generate an API token for OpenAI, you'll need to create an account. Once you've created an account, go to View API Keys, and then create a new secret key. Copy that key to a secure location. For security purposes, I will be deleting this one as well and using the one that previously existed. Now that you have your API keys, we can begin scripting. The basic idea of generating these these category descriptions, is that we will first want to pull down a list of categories from Shopify. Then we will want to ask OpenAI for each category, generate a category description for that category. Once OpenAI has generated that category description, we will then want to push that data back into Shopify using Shopify's API. So there will be 3 API calls, essentially. Some of them will be occurring within a loop. The first API call is the Shopify to pull down the information. The second API call occurs within a loop as we iterate through all of the collection names. And then we will be asking OpenAI to generate a category description for each category individually. And after OpenAI has generated the category description, there will be another call to Shopify to push that information back into Shopify. So let's start by looking at Shopify's API on how to pull down information about a collection. Shopify refers to collections as custom collections in their API. So what we want to do is we want to place a GET request to retrieve a list of custom collections. I'll be using curl because everything I will be doing will occur on the command line, although there is documentation with examples for other languages as well. Here you can see a sample request to get a list of all custom collections. And you can also see a sample response that shows you what type of information is returned. So you'll get the ID, the handle, the title, and other information about the collection. If we look at the script that I've written, you'll see that the first step is to get a list of custom collections from Shopify. We'll be storing that in a variable for custom collections response. And we place a curl request to the Shopify store, getting all custom collections. Of course, we have to pass information such as our access token to be able to access this information within the API. Next, we will be reformatting the response to a cleaner JSON array. Basically, all we care about here is the ID of the collection and the title of the collection. So we'll remove all extraneous data and save that into a new variable. And then we will reformat that JSON into a CSV, which will allow us to more easily iterate over each line within that CSV with Bash or our shell script. So let's place a sample request and see what type of information we get back. So when we first run our curl request, you can see the list of all the collections with all of the data coming back. Piping that into JQ, which is a command line tool which allows us to process and reformat JSON information, we can easily clean up that information coming back from the API. So here, we've reformatted everything, and it's being returned as just an ID and a title. And then we will pipe that again through JQ to convert that into a CSV. Oops. There you go. So now we iterate through each line and generate some additional requests to basically ask OpenAI to generate a category description for each line. To do that, we will need to use OpenAI's API. So OpenAI's API is fairly simple. You place a request to their completions endpoint, and you pass your API key, and then your request data needs to include a model. And there's some information about models. You can refer to models documentation to understand what models are available and the differences between them. And basically, these models explain the maximum number of tokens that can be used, their basically speed, and how capable they are at generating responses. And so it sounds like here, based on these descriptions, that the Text DaVinci 003 is the most capable GPT model or ChatGPT model from OpenAI. So that's the model that we will be using here, although we could use any other model that we chose to use. Then we pass a prompt. The prompt is basically what we are asking OpenAI to do. So in this case, we would say something like, generate a category description for the amino acids category or the apparel category. And then we have to pass it additional parameters like how long we want the response to be, which is max tokens. Max tokens, you can find the completion request here and all the parameters that it accepts. Max tokens is the maximum number of tokens to generate. Basically, tokens are the number of characters that appear in the response. The characters do not necessarily so if you say max tokens, it could generate a shorter response, but it would not generate a longer response. So if we said 300 characters, it might generate a 250 character response, or it might generate a 300 character response. So that's basically the desired length of your text. And temperature is basically the risk that it takes. If you have a higher value, it will try to take more risks. And a zero value means that it is a more well-defined answer. So it's basically like how many assumptions is ChatGPT going to make when processing your request. So we will, in our script, generate a description. So we've got a function defined that would generate a description using OpenAI or ChatGPT. And that is basically the request data that we're passing in. So we've got the DaVinci model, and then we're using a prompt. Our prompt is a variable. Here we've got the name of a company is an e-commerce supplement brand. So we're telling the AI a little bit about the content or the context of the content that we want generated, and we say write a description for this company's and then this is a variable, so let's say amino acid category, or write a description for this company's apparel category, and then OpenAI will attempt to write a category description for that category. So we've got the prompt being passed in here, we've got a temperature, which is 0, we want it to be making as little assumptions as possible, and then the maximum number of tokens, which is in this case 300, because that's how long we want the descriptions to be. And then we're placing a request to the OpenAPI completions endpoint. We're passing our OpenAPI key, and we're sending along our request data. And then using that, we're basically going to get something like the following. Let me see if I can generate a quick response. So if we grab this, let's actually grab these things. as an example, we might want our prompt to say glutamine. And then we might want to say our request data is this. Oh, I see what I've done. I have overwritten my prompt, which is not something you want to do. Let me restart this. So new tab, cd in my scripts directory, source my API keys, and let's just call this something different. So we will call this prompt 1, and maybe we'll do the amino acid category this time. Okay. Then we set our request data. And then we place our curl request. And we need to make sure, we gotta make sure request data uses prompt 1 as well. So let's go in here, set prompt 1, and then place our curl request. And that'll take a moment for OpenAI to generate a response. And when it does, you can see the response is in JSON format, and we can format that using JQ as well. And we can see basically when we get that back that what we really care about is the first element of the choices array, which is this text property, which includes the description for that category. So we will extract that using JQ, basically extracting the choices array item text. And then what we'll notice is that that text includes some leading new lines and some quotes. It's wrapped in quotes. This is good for JSON. Like, this format is really helpful when passing information back and forth between JSON files, because you cannot have new lines in your JSON values, or your new lines will be, or your JSON will be invalid. So it's really important that you encode your new lines as escape sequences, like \n. But for the purposes of this script, we want to go ahead and strip these out because we don't really want the new lines in the in the category description. So that's what this is doing here. It's looking for any leading quotes or new lines and any trailing new lines or quotes, and then basically stripping those things out of the string. So the generate description basically accepts a variable which gets passed into the prompt, and then generates a collection description using that prompt. So we can say for each line now, which again, each line of this, we can ask OpenAI to generate a description. Then, once we have our what is referred to as body HTML, we need to update the custom collection. So in order to update an existing custom collection, you need to place a put request. To place a put request, you can use the sample code here. You will have to pass in some information about the collection, but basically you pass it to the API using the ID of the collection that you want to update. So here we can see that we're constructing our request data. So we're pushing new custom updating a custom collection. The custom collection ID is whichever ID we're pulling from that CSV file. The body HTML is the HTML that we just generated using OpenAI. And then we're placing a curl request to Shopify using that collection ID, so pushing it to that collection ID and using that request data. And then basically you run the script. It first pulls down the information, like we said. Then it pipes that information, that CSV information, into this while loop. It reads the ID in the title. Based on the title, it generates a description. Then it constructs a request to Shopify to update the collection based on ID using the generated description. So we'll go ahead and run that script now. And in Shopify, once again, we can confirm that these collections don't currently have any descriptions. We can also look at the front end, and you can see there's no description here. Now we'll go ahead and generate the descriptions, and it will begin doing its thing. So it's going to go do everything that we discussed, pulling down the information. It's grabbing the descriptions from OpenAI and pushing that into Shopify. And what we're seeing here is the response from Shopify's API as it updates each collection. And what's cool is that you can also see, because the most recently updated collections appear at the top of the list in Shopify. As the script is running, you can refresh this list and sort of get an idea of the progress. So it's going alphabetically, and it's currently updated core help. So if we look at amino acids, for example, we'll see that it has generated a description for the amino acids category. Or if we look at apparel, you can see that it has generated a description for the apparel category. We can also confirm this on the front end by viewing the category, and now we have a description for this category. So pretty easily, just using some simple API requests, we can automatically generate SEO category descriptions for potentially hundreds of categories that exist within Shopify. But this approach could be abstracted to other platforms very easily. This could be used for BigCommerce, Adobe Commerce, or any other e-commerce platform that supports an API. And there's very little human involvement required. All you need to do is go in after the fact and confirm that the description that was generated matches the description that you would expect for each of these categories. You could also use the script to output a CSV, which you could then import with a tool like Matrixify. If you wanted to not write that information directly back to the API, if you wanted to just test it out and see what type of descriptions it was generating before you imported them, you could edit them within that CSV and then import it with Matrixify. That's an option. Or you could always write a script that loops through that CSV and use the Shopify API to import it, which is exactly what Matrixify does in the backend. So there are lots of options with the APIs that are pretty easy to implement. And if you have any questions, Trellis is always happy to help. So today we've learned how to generate SEO descriptions using ChatGPT and OpenAI. Thanks very much.